All right, let's just go ahead and kick it off. Hello, explorers, and welcome to Dispatches from the Field. This is an exciting new program from the Explorers Club designed to better connect our global community, regardless of where you are in the world, and really shine a light on the incredible work that our members are doing. Let me give you a little bit of a rundown of what to expect if this is your first time joining. We will have a featured speaker that will share their incredible work and learnings along the way for roughly 10 minutes. And after that, we will break out into what we call campfire sessions, which are small networked groups where you really get the chance to connect and meet other members. Super fun, really collaborative, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy if you haven't done it yet before. Now, our featured speaker today is an EC50 awardee and a pioneer, an entrepreneur, and a founder who has spent decades pushing the boundaries of what's possible, both in the field and in the world of medicine. This is Mark Hannaford. Of course, if you haven't met Dr. Mark yet, in 1996, Mark launched Across the Divide, an adventure expedition company that helped tens of thousands of people experience the thrill of challenge, and in the process, raised over 130 million for UK charities. He may have raised even more than that now. Now, that experience sparked something bigger, the realization that medics needed better training to better provide care in some of the world's most extreme environments. And so in 2002, Mark founded World Extreme Medicine, a global network that has since trained over 20,000 professionals to deliver life-saving care in the toughest conditions on Earth. Talking to us about how to flow in extremes, please join me in welcoming the amazing Dr. Mark Hannaford.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all, especially as it's the first one post ECAD. Just to clarify, my doctorate is honorary, so I don't use that title, but just because otherwise people because my background is non-clinical, but I'm working in a medical field. I don't want people to be confused that I'm pretending to be a medical pretending to be an MD. But it's a great pleasure to be here to join you. I'm based and living in Abu Dhabi now. So I don't know what time it is. It is with you. I think in New York it's midday. So sort of happy midday and good morning to everybody, or good evening wherever you are. I guess my journey, as I mentioned, my background is not clinical. My background is my training was in geography and geomorphology. But when I wrote to Brandy, I was one side of a significant birthday, and I wrote in the text that I'd been doing expeditions for 30 years, but I passed a threshold, an age threshold, that made it much easier for me to calculate how long I'd been doing expeditions. And I realized actually I'd been doing expeditions. I had my 21st birthday in Morocco, leading an expedition in the Anti-Atlas. So I'd been doing it for 40 years. It came as a bit of a shock and a realization, and I realized I'd missed a whole decade of talking about expeditions. But clearly, it's something that I absolutely love, and I think we're probably members of a quite select club, but we're also selecting ourselves in so much and I don't doubt that lots of us do love what we do. We love, we have the honor of doing professions that excite us, that deliver benefit to other people, which engages and keep us stimulated. I've been, somebody said to me probably about 20 years ago, won't you get bored of doing expeditions? And I just started planning my next big one in Northern Arabia. And I found myself diving into the detail, being as excited now as I was when I first did my first trip to Morocco 40 years ago. I think, and I first came across this phenomena reading Scientific America, but it's the Explorer gene, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that Explorer gene. It's it's the just sort of catchily named the DRD4-7R gene, which gives 20% of us, it's estimated, that desire to have change, to explore, to push boundaries, to need perhaps more intellectual or physical stimulation than the other 80%. And of course, as society, that's a great benefit because as a species, we want the majority of us to be producing and being stable and reproducing, making families, making communities, building civilizations. But you also need, and I think the club has a very probably disproportionate number of these people, as do populations living by the sea, of people with this explorer's gene. It's a double-edged sword, gives lots of positives in terms of drives us as humanity to reach across far horizons, to explore new lands, to reach into space and to, plan the land again on the moon and travel to Mars. So there's lots of positives, but I don't know about you, but it's certainly part of my personality that I get frustrated with normality. And I used to, until I actually started reading more about this gene, I used to blame it on a weakness in myself, not being able to conform and kind of do what my friends do and be happy with that. That was never something that has been part of my personality, and I felt being restless was it to a degree a fault. But now knowing that actually I'm driven by my genes to explore and to travel and to seek new experiences gives me a greater understanding inside myself. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, I first came across this in the Scientific American article about people who live by the sea have a higher propensity to have this gene. And if you think back, in history, traveling across the land would expose you to being ambushed. It would expose you to more danger than if you were traveling by sea, where you could see your enemy coming from a long distance. The sea, the maritime environment, were our highway to explore. So if you were driven by this gene and were a peripatetic explorer, you would go to ports, you would live by the sea, you would return from expeditions and far climbs and make families and reproduce. So your gene would sit by the sea. And certainly in the UK, which I think you might just be able to tell is where I'm from originally, those sort of coastal populations, those coastal explorers, they're everywhere. And I suspect probably perhaps in countries like the UK, which are surrounded by water, obviously, that there is a higher propensity of this gene. Now, as Brandy very, very kindly pointed out, for the last sort of 20, 25 years, I've really concentrated in remote medicine. The reason for that, when I was leading expeditions, I wanted to have the best possible backup. You can't, you shouldn't remove adventure from your life, but what you can do is mitigate some of that risk. And certainly when I was working professionally, I wanted to make sure that the people who were traveling with me if something went wrong, were as best catered for. So I set up an expedition company. And as far as I know this, we were the first company in the world to take doctors. And at that time, paramedicine and emergency nursing wasn't developed nearly as developed as it is now. So we primarily started with doctors traveling our expeditions. And I think we were the first commercial expedition company to take a doctor on every single expedition that we did. The difference with us is we salaried them. So they became a professional relationship. And then what we realized that actually it was advantageous for our doctors to train our expedition leaders and for our expedition leaders to train our doctors, cross-fertilize those skills. And so that if your doctor is dealing with a casualty, your expedition leader or expedition team are also capable of giving a hand. They know where the equipment is in their rucksack. So if it's dark, windy, snowing, blizzards, the doctor asks, or the medic asks for something from the medical pack, they know where that is and they know the reason why they're handing it over. Similarly, if it's the medic that's out of play, you want your expedition team to be as competent as they possibly can in terms of dealing with them as a casualty. And I've been really fortunate in so much as it wasn't really a field that was particularly well developed, certainly not in the UK. So in fact, for a long time, we were asked by our medical team to put a publicly facing course on because they had so many of their colleagues and friends who wanted to do the training that we were doing internally. But we were busy, to be quite frank, doing expeditions. But when my youngest son arrived, I was stable in one place unusually for a bit. And we decided just to, almost as a favor, try to run one course. And we ran one single course, and 70 doctors turned up. And it was like, crikey. Well, here's the thing. One, we really, really enjoyed the people that we're working with. We felt like actually we were making a societal contribution because we realized by doing the training that the medics that were there actually improving some of their clinical skills, and I'll explain why in a minute. But also clearly it was sustainable. Now that was 25 years ago, and sort of like segueing now to where we are. So we run a host of courses around the world, and we run a master's program with the University of Exeter in the UK, a certificate program with Northeastern, and there's other programs coming up. During the pandemic, we were incredibly honored to be taken on by Paramount Studios to cover all their film productions that weren't in the USA. So we covered Mission Impossible, Shantaram. Don't tell your president this. These films are filmed overseas, outside of the US borders. Shantaram, Mission Impossible, Transformers, sorry. A whole host of movies, which was an absolutely fascinating environment to work in. And probably you would have seen some of our medics in action. So for the last 10 years, we've been the medical team for USA Survivor. And I can't divulge any the details, but the next couple of series, which are being filmed at the moment, there's some really quite interesting medical stuff that is going to appear. And I can't say what it is, and I don't want to spoil the grand reveal, but it's going to be pretty interesting, to be honest. So you would have seen our medics in action there. And it feels incredibly worthwhile doing this. Clearly, it's a way of me earning a living from living in an expedition world. But what we've found over the last couple of decades is that medical professionals, be they now sort of paramedics, nurses, doctors, and the whole range of healthcare professionals, because we're now working in not only expeditions but also in humanitarian and disaster settings, in space medicine, in tactical operational medicine, um, the opportunities for medics in this field is vastly wider than it used to be, but also their benefit, the ability to contribute is significantly improved. If you imagine in a sudden onset disaster or a humanitarian camp, doctors are great, but there's also every day people are still giving birth. They still have physio issues. They still have all the normal life stuff that we have in our normal lives, but probably amplified because of the conditions they're living in. So that broad spectrum of medical backup, is really sort of very valuable and needed. But what we found was that we had doctors and medics coming to us and saying, I was at the point of giving up medicine because I was so frustrated by the admin, by the laws, by working in hospitals, I'm spending less and less time actually doing patient stuff and facing people than I was actually doing the medicine I signed up for. But by taking medicine outside of hospitals and putting it into these environments where you're dealing with real people in front of you and you can see the impact that you're having, made them re-love medicine, if that's a good way of expressing it. I think it probably is. I mean, their passion for medicine is reignited because one of our cornerstone, certainly one of my cornerstone ambitions, we want to keep good medics in medicine. So I set up a fellowship, just anecdotally, set up a fellowship with the MC in extreme medicine at my local hospital, and they invited me in to be part of the interview process. And I said, I'm not an ED doctor. I don't know how ED departments work. But they insisted that I come. And I went with the premise that if my children were injured in an RTA, it was the fellows that I was selecting in that interview that would undoubtedly be the people treating them. And I wanted the very best doctors in that ED department. And I wanted them to be problem solvers. I wanted them to be good team players. I wanted them to get the best out of themselves, but also the teams around them. And we found by exposing medical professionals and indeed, us as a community to these types of experience, you learn communication skills that you would not otherwise develop. You learn from a clinical point of view, diagnostic skills, because you don't have a raft of tests to go off and order. you have to diagnose what's in front of you. And quite often you're by yourself. There is no phone a friend. So you have to rely on your own clinical skills. So people were developing them quite strongly. And also in our environments, in remote environments, low resource environments, you don't have all the tools and resources. So you have to problem solve, you have to make do. And we do quite a lot of training by introducing different medical disciplines like vets. Because for vets, they don't just get one subject matter, they get everything from elephants to snakes and everything in between, with seven guts and one gut and seven hearts and all that type of stuff. So, for vets working in low resource environments in the wildlife setting, they have to be almost the ultimate sort of problem solver. So it's learning from each other and sort of expanding our expectation of what medicine actually means. And I think, sadly, with the challenges that they're facing, is both on a geopolitical sort of basis, but also from climate and how our world is um, facing existential threats, taking medicine out of hospital, making it more mobile is one of the things that we're going to have to do more and more. And we want the very best clinicians doing that. And at the moment, certainly, it is the best clinicians that are attracted to this type of medicine because you need the confidence to do that. So that's kind of what I've spent the last 25 years doing. And that, combined with that sort of explorer's dream and the frustration of sitting still, it's actually allowed me to develop something that's given me a sense of flow. And the best example I can use of the sense of flow that I've felt myself, and it's a rare occurrence, but there's an extraordinary Australian physician called Glenn Singleman, who may, I think, be an Explorers Club member, who talks about it really extraordinarily well with his base jumping, about how he sets himself up to get into flow. Now, for me, I love being in boats. So working for what is now Lindblad National Geographic Expeditions, I did 4 seasons for them and for other companies. Well, in fact, I did almost 18 years working freelance for different people, working down in Antarctica. And I realized that when I got into my zodiac at the beginning of the day, 6 hours could literally flow by. And because I was so engrossed and so in tune with what I was doing, you kind of open your eyes and look up and you think, the day is gone, but what has happened? But you've been so immersed in what you're doing. And I think actually being at sea for me is one of those things. So, we go through life, and of course, you don't go through life without some hiccups and some trip ups and unfortunate incidences and people passing away and stuff like that. And I found when I was going through those sort of low slumps, for me, sea kayaking was the hypnotism I needed. For me, sea kayaking meant that I could be physical. I could do the exercise, which the explorer gene kind of drove me to do. But there were so many variables when you're at sea, and there's nobody at all who is going to come and get you. Of course, the life or the Coast Guard might eventually turn up. At the end of the day, in the short term, it's entirely you that has to look after yourself. And that immersion in being trying to keep yourself afloat and safe and doing a sense of journey and physical activity meant that my mind couldn't spin and think about other things. It had to be fully engaged. And I think finding that place where you flow, where your mind is so engaged, you're not, when there's stuff going on, it's not spinning at the top in the back of your mind, is really incredibly useful. And it varies, I think, from person. Well, clearly it varies from person to person. It could be dog walking, it could be writing poetry, it could be music, dancing. But finding that flow, that space where you feel karmic, is incredibly important. But what fell out of purposefully trying to calm myself down when difficult stuff was going on by being almost hypnotic. That other stuff fell out of that. It gave my mind, the subconscious, the opportunity to spot opportunities that if I'd been so busy, I wouldn't have noticed. And I guess a very good example of this is just sitting and kayaking and paddling along and just not thinking about anything made me realize that if I wrote to NASA, maybe they would give me the opportunity to speak to an astronaut in space. Now, that was 15 years ago, and I've had a 15-year relationship with the astronaut office at Johnson Space Center, which culminated in 2 things. One, it's the first time that Tom Cruise, the director, has ever done an interview, and he was the interviewer of Victor Glover, the space capsule pilot for the when SpaceX first did their Dragon capsule and is on the Artemis mission. He said to us, okay, I'll agree to do this. It's quite an unusual request. Actually, the long story is he was supposed to speak to Tom Marshburn, who was in space, but it was one of those times when the launch was delayed and we had a fixed window. So I had a gamble. I was given a choice. I could either gamble and hope that Tom would get to the International Space Station in time and get there in time to then do the call with Tom, or I could play safe and go with the interview with Victor Glover, who was on terra firma at Houston. And I played safe for once in my life. And Tom did the interview, but arrived saying, "We have got 20 minutes, 20 minutes, all you're going to get." An hour and 10 minutes later, with the most incredible conversation between the two of them, we actually had to call an end to it because it was just going beyond the time limit that we had available for ourselves. So, that was a direct result of going into flow, being in a kayak and letting my mind spin about what I'd like to achieve. The second bit of that, I guess, is we did a space medicine conference last year at Exeter University, and Mike Barrett, who was in the International Space Station, called down and gave our students an hour of private access to the International Space Station. And again, none of that, I mean, crikey, I mean, how does that even happen? I mean, I couldn't even think about how to make it happen now, but it's going into that flow space and giving your time the capacity in the space to kind of imagine what is possible, and asking nicely, and sometimes invariably people say yes. It's really quite incredible. And I think we all have so many pressures on us, don't we? And expeditions are a place where you can find that karmic place, that calm space. The problem, I'm beginning to appreciate that the expedition I'm planning in Northern Arabia is quite complicated. And actually, I know that when I eventually get onto that expedition, which is in about a year or so, it's just going to be a huge relief, because everything, all the stuff I know that I'm going to go through to get there is going to be past, and we'll put one foot on the ground and start walking, start walking for what essentially will be for about 6 weeks. And it's going to be a blessed relief, and that nobody will be able to reach me. It will be so remote. So the comms will be off and life will then be sweet. But that will only lead to the next plan, because of course by doing that expedition, then it's just going to lead on to the sort of the next challenge to set up. But I think understanding the fact that we probably as a community are driven genetically to be frustrated by normal life, and that we do need a bigger stimuli and stimulus, and that by gathering people like yourselves around us, we can almost, we can make the impossible a reality, but also at the same time change the way the world runs and contribute massively to its evolution. I guess for lots of us now, our main function is not to inspire those around us, but those who are behind us, the next generations coming up, and make sure and try and ensure that they're better than us. They're better equipped, they're better informed, they have better tools to make bigger impact. So I guess for me, that's the challenge I'm setting myself now, is to make sure that I spend a reasonable amount of my time, working and mentoring people coming up behind me, and not ignoring the random calls and emails that you get asking for help and information and contacts and stuff, and giving those contacts freely. I do what I do, and I have had a life of expeditions and adventure because people have given me and opened doors for me along the way. And I think it's very much a cycle. What you give out is what you get back. And certainly for me, that's been a testament to how and what's happened to me. I suppose I should also talk about our work in Ukraine, which we've been doing for the last 3 years. So we set off rather with an ambition to raise. I use sterling actually, because then I won't do the translation incorrect here. £150,000 was our challenge. In fact, I'm just going to check, because we keep our figures up to date, day to day. So we set up with a challenge of raising £150,000, and we are now just short of £3.7 million in terms of delivering trauma supply and training. And I have to say, Ukraine wasn't a country I knew personally an awful lot about. We didn't have a network like we do in more far away places like in Namibia and Tanzania and Australia and stuff. Um, and it's been a remarkable experience. I did feel that the beginning of this year that we would be pulling out of Ukraine, but sadly, I don't see us putting out for at least another 2 years. And the need is very evident, and it changes every single day. We were focused for the first couple of years down in Kherson, which is on the Dnipro border. The front line is on the other side of that river. And this sounds a bit sort of passe or simplistic, but the original risk when we went there was artillery and missiles, and that was kind of a little bit random. If your number was up, your number was up. Now drones have changed absolutely everything. And it feels like that sort of dynamite analogy that dynamite can be used for great good, but it can also be used for huge destruction. I think drones are exactly the same. We can rescue people off the side of mountains with drones, but equally, they can be used to, as you know, to track vehicles and drop bombs and stuff. So it's the world has changed as a result of the conflict and also the use of drones, and it will no longer be the same. And it's going to be quite extraordinary to see how that change manifests itself in Ukraine, but also in the wider world in terms of how our society reacts to that. So that's, I don't know how long you want me to talk for, Randy. Actually, and I didn't time myself, so I'm not sure how long I have been rabbiting on for.
Oh, that's okay. Actually, it's a really powerful way to be able to bring it home with your work in Ukraine because it's been so incredible to be able to follow that and really see it. And you made so many good points, Mark, about, I mean, of course, it's important to make sure that people are equipped with the skills that they need to be able to handle these medical emergencies in the field. But also, I found it really interesting how, in doing that, it can also really revitalize people's passion for why they got into the field to begin with, to be free from being in the centralized hospital network within the admin and really be back in touch with making that direct patient contact, and how that can really cultivate different insights and kind of sort of hone in on being able to give that space for new thinking and problem solving to come into play too. So some really, really good points that you made, Mark, and thank you so much for that too.